All right then, how are we doing on time? Not too bad. Without further ado, I want to bring on our first speaker of the day. This is Chris Hornback, who's the Deputy CEO from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. And he has been working in the water sector, water treatment sector, water quality sector for quite a while. And he's going to bring us up to date on a lot of different aspects of recycled nutrients and other strategies from his perspective. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Chris. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
And Chris, while that's transitions happening, I just want to note to everyone, if you have any questions during Chris's talk, please use the raise hand feature in chat in the participants box. And I'll be monitoring those. And when we get to the Q&A, we can pose those questions to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And thanks, Jim, for that invitation or introduction. Can you see my slides now, Matt?
Yes, I can, Chris. Thanks.
Okay, great. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Many of you guys, just looking at the list of participants, a lot of you are scientists, researchers, doing some amazing work. I am a self-professed policy wonk and spend my day reading federal regulations and federal registers and laws and other things. So fasten your seatbelts, get ready for 15 or so minutes of an exciting journey into the world of federal regulations, governing a lot of what we want to do in terms of sustainable phosphorus use in the United States. So in all seriousness though, this is an issue that my organization and myself personally have been working on for many years, trying to navigate the current regulatory landscape framework that governs wastewater treatment plants, the residuals and products that come from them, and how we can kind of advance and be more innovative in the products that we derive from these resources. So just really quick by way of background, I do want to talk about the work that we've been doing to try to create the regulatory space to allow for more sustainable phosphorus recovery from wastewater treatment plants. That's my focus for today, and I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing. First, just a real quick overview of who NACWA is. We are a trade association. We represent public wastewater and stormwater utilities across the United States. So we're only in the US, and we are only representing public utilities. We have about 330, 340 public agency members across the US of all sizes. And as I mentioned earlier, we spend our days on regulatory, legal, legislative, and communications advocacy, generally in Washington, D.C., although these days we're all in our homes around the D.C. area. So our members, this is one of them, that's just down the street from me. They're wastewater treatment plants, and their job is to treat and reclaim, and in our case, the majority of the wastewater, serving the majority of the population in the U.S. So while we only have 330 or so members, they are, as this example here, they are some of the really big ones for sure. For decades, our members have been content to, from the 70s through the 80s and the 90s, very content to just sort of be in the background, not draw a lot of attention. If no one noticed what our members were doing, that was a good thing. It meant we weren't in the newspaper, we didn't have negative headlines. We were doing our jobs. We were providing clean water. But over the last 10 years or so, we've seen these utilities looking to become more innovative. They've been looking for new ways of doing business. They've become more outwardly focused, engaging with their community, talking to ratepayers about what it means to treat water and wastewater and to return it back to the environment and to recover resources. And these utilities have also been looking to expand what has already been a decades-long job of recovering resources. but looking for new resources to recover from these processes. About 10 years ago, my organization, along with a couple of others, we coined this new mindset, the utility of the future, sort of looking beyond just treating wastewater and meeting regulations. But these utilities, the utilities that I work with that are treating this wastewater, they remain highly regulated by US EPA, their states, and they are, by their very nature, very risk averse. They're public health stewards. They want to make sure that they're meeting their requirements. And they, at the end of the day, that is their number one mission. Being innovative, looking at new technologies, spending money on things that might fail. Those are things that aren't really in the vocabulary of the people that I work with, because they are responsible for doing their entire mission all using public money. So they are not only environmental stewards, but they're also stewards of the ratepayer dollar that they collect for that service. So failure really is not an option for them. Trying out the newest, latest, greatest technology for them is really very difficult. So, well, that's sort of real quick background. I do want to sort of really quickly jump into this question of derived products. As I mentioned, resource recovery is part of our mission. It's been part of our mission since day one. We've been cleaning water and returning it to the environment. We've been safely managing and treating biosolids, sewage sludge, and really for decades have been land applying and sustainably managing nitrogen and phosphorus by returning it to the farm fields, agriculture, burned land from forest fires, any kind of reclamation project, mine reclamation. Biosolids work wonders on these properties. So we've been doing this for years, but we obviously, what we're here to talk about today is sort of moving beyond those basics and looking at a greater recovery of phosphorus from these treatment plants. And one of the first things that popped up when utilities started to think about this utility of the future mindset and looking for new opportunities was struvite recovery. It emerged early on with a lot of potential. And if you think about it, it just made sense. Struvite is, it's a phosphate mineral. That's why we're going to talk about it today. You're going to hear a lot about it from other speakers. But for my members, it can be a real problem from an operational standpoint. It's basically a kidney stone inside of a wastewater treatment plant. Our pipes are pumps. They get filled with this stuff, and it's from an engineering standpoint, it's a nightmare. So when these technologies came along that enabled us to intentionally precipitate struvite from the process rather than it forming where we didn't want it, and so helping us avoid that engineering problem. It also helps us meet very stringent phosphorus limits, which I'll talk about at the end. And it all comes with the added bonus of producing a slow release form of phosphorus for use as fertilizer. I mean, it's the ultimate win-win-win. So it was no surprise that our utilities really jumped at this opportunity initially when we first started to hear about it. There are other resources that that our researchers, and Aaron Fisher from the Water Research Foundation is on the line, and there are others that are working to look at what is the next sort of great thing in terms of resource recovery. But today, we're going to talk about phosphorus for obvious reasons. So struvite, it's a product. It's recovered from, in our case, a wastewater treatment process. But that wastewater treatment process is highly regulated under the federal statute that governs wastewater treatment plants, called the Clean Water Act. It's been in place since 1972, and it tells EPA how to develop the regulations that my members have to follow. 1972, we were not thinking about intentional precipitation of struvite from wastewater treatment plants in 1972. The statute doesn't mention it, doesn't discuss it, doesn't even talk about products, other than later on there were amendments that talked about regulating biosolid sewage sludge, leading to federal regulations for that. So as we started to get into this, utilities ask the natural question, okay, well, how are these products that are being recovered from a highly regulated waste treatment process, how are they regulated, if at all? Being the public stewards that they are, they wanted to know that what they were doing was in compliance with all federal rules and regulations. So we went to EPA, and in initial conversations with US EPA, we work primarily with the folks at headquarters in Washington, D.C. They looked at the statute that they had, and the statute they had, the Clean Water Act, said you have three main buckets. You've got wastewater, which is permitted, the discharge. You have biosolids, which are managed under a separate set of regulations. And you have what we call grit and screening. So it's the stuff that's neither wastewater nor biosolids, but it ends up in a landfill. So while it's not regulated by the Clean Water Act, it goes into a landfill that's regulated by another federal statute. So EPA was trying to figure out, all right, well, these recovered products, the first of which that we're really focused on today, struvite, they don't fit into any of those buckets. But EPA felt like they had to put it into one. And so their initial thinking was it's got to be a biosolid. We have to think about it as a biosolid. It's derived from this treatment process. In some cases, it may look like a biosolid. It's land applied like biosolids are to recover that phosphorus content. But in reality, it was really that square peg in a round hole. But EPA didn't feel like they had any choice. They had a statute, had regulations they had to work with. So, and utilities really, to their credit, some utilities really tried to make this work. They tried to see if they could take their recovered struvite and kind of push it through these federal regulations and see if they could comply with the existing structure. And it just didn't work. For a number of technical reasons, it degraded the product. It just doesn't work because it wasn't designed for it. These products are completely different than what biosolids are and what those biosolids regulations were designed to protect. So what we found, obviously, here that I think you've figured out now, a classic example of regulations impeding innovation. And what we did, my association, this is what we do. We see a problem, we identify it, we're going to work on it, try to get it fixed. So we started talking about it internally with EPA in 2001 and 2002. Or excuse me, 2011 and 2012. At the time, we started to talk to EPA, and they talked about those three buckets. They didn't issue a clear federal policy. There still is no clear federal statement as to how struvite is regulated, which led to states kind of doing their own thing. And in one state in particular, they made an interesting observation that the struvite material recovered from the treatment process was intentionally generated as a product. It's essentially a fertilizer when it's bagged and collected. Why not let the state's agricultural department now take over responsibility for this material? So I've generated a product. It now looks and operates effectively like a commodity, like a fertilizer. Why not hand it over to those people who regulate fertilizers? And they did that. There was no guidance telling them that they couldn't do that. Effectively, that waste material that had been derived from a waste treatment process became a product and ceased to become a waste. Europe has a very similar type approach where materials qualifying for end of waste can kind of pass out of waste regulation. The US actually has similar provisions under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, where when looking at a material, they can see, okay, this doesn't look like a waste. It's not being managed as waste. We're storing it like it's a commodity. We're handling it like it's a commodity. It no longer is a waste. Let's pass it out of regulation. So we had these conversations. The bottom line of our initial conversations was this letter that you see on the slide. It was notably issued by a Democratic administration. It was at the tail end of the Obama administration. They really wanted to make this work. The best that they could do, however, was this letter, which said what the slide says: products sold as commodities and not land applied, land disposed, or incinerated are outside the scope of Part 503. That's the biosolids regulation. So they said, okay, if you don't manage it like a biosolid, we can agree with you that this product is no longer in our regulatory sphere. The problem with struvite is that it's often used in a manner that constitutes application on the land or use as a fertilizer. That's the whole point of it. And so they put us into this sort of do loop of, we will take a look at these materials and we'll evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, if you fast forward to today and to wrap up, this case-by-case letter from January of 2017 is the only thing we have from the federal level that has any kind of guidance on how these materials are regulated. That's not super helpful in terms of a risk-averse wastewater treatment plant that's trying to have some comfort around trying something innovative and working it into its normal operations. The case-by-case letter has not been tested. No one that we're aware of has gone into EPA and said, hey, we have this struvite product. We want to hold you at your word and get a case-by-case determination. So we're sort of in this limbo. The Trump administration did make an effort at the outset of the Trump administration to reform existing regulations. It was sort of a big deal, but it was made a big deal and was politicized. But if you can think of any better example of where you have a common sense solution, where an existing regulation, which is just doesn't match what we're dealing with, is potentially blocking innovation and the deployment of an innovative recovery technology. This is an excellent example, which could take a very easy regulatory revision to create sort of an off-ramp for this and get it out of, and just make it clear that it shouldn't be regulated as a biosolid. We don't think, and we feel like EPA has the authority under its current statute to completely carve this out. In fact, we know that EPA's attorneys actually agree with us. The attorneys feel like they could handle this either inside the Clean Water Act or outside the Clean Water Act. But at the end of the day, and we don't fault EPA staff at all for this, they feel like they need to be more protective than simply letting this material out of the Clean Water Act regulation. So the conversation continues. The current crew at the current leadership at the Office of Water, which are Trump appointees, they get it. They understand this issue. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get them to dedicate the time to address this issue. So we remain in this limbo, and we're hopeful that we can continue this conversation with post-election, either with the Trump administration or with a new administration, and that's going to be our objective. We've been working on it for 8 or 9 years. We're going to keep working on it till it makes sense. The point I'll leave you with is that this isn't the only obstacle to further deployment of struvite recovery at wastewater treatment plants. You'll hear from others today who will probably talk about it. This regulatory uncertainty is where I live and where our members certainly are focused in terms of making sure they're in compliance with the Clean Water Act. But there are a number of other considerations, and I mentioned the financial implications. There are a lot of competing priorities for the limited amount of ratepayer dollars that we have. This little thing that we've been dealing with over the last couple of months, this global pandemic, has not helped the financial situation of a lot of utilities. And at the end of the day, there are other drivers, lack of regulatory drivers that are impacting the further deployment of struvite. You'll hear more about that from speakers later, I'm sure. That's my little piece. Matt, Jim, thanks again for the few minutes that I had.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for walking us through that maze. I'll let Matt take over moderating the questions, and raise hand if you want to ask a question, and Matt will unmute you and call on you.
Sure. It looks like we have a question here from Laura Campbell. And Laura, I've just unmuted you.
Thanks. Chris, that was a really interesting presentation. And one of the things I wonder about is how transportable is struvite. I know one of the challenges we've had, and we're a farm organization. We work with a lot of wastewater treatment plants to help them coordinate with land application of biosolids, and they're always limited by how far they can economically transport biosolids for land application. Is struvite a different product that you could move that either longer distances or regionally, or kind of thinking about it from the perspective of hey, whose land is really in desperate need of phosphorus, who needs to be getting rid of legacy phosphorus and not have it locally land applied?
Great question. And there are a number of folks on the phone that'll talk later. I know Austera's on the line. A number of folks that work in that space that can answer this question better than I can. But the short answer is struvite is much easier to transport longer distances because it's drier. Biosolids is inherently a wet product, even when it's quote unquote dried. And that is a huge limiting factor in terms of distances. And it's, it's expensive to transport all of that water from one point to the other. So yeah, it's immensely more transportable.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we have one more from Ed Weinberg here. And Ed, you're probably gonna be the last one. We're a little short on time. I've asked you to unmute if you can unmute yourself. Ed, you there? Okay, I think we're gonna go on, Chris, to Madeline Fleischer, I guess it is.
Yep, you got it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Madeline.
Thanks, and thanks for that, Chris. I was just going to ask sort of what is the potential scale of this if you were able to sort of overcome some of these regulatory obstacles, deal with transport and all that, those kind of practical issues. What scale of market is this, and how much diversion could you get from the waste, total waste amount?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, there are others on the line that can hopefully will address that. I think in the panel discussion later, better than I can, because they've studied it more. But what I was alluding to at the end is in terms of lack of regulatory driver, the deployment of these technologies across the water sector has been slower. The adoption of them has been slower than I think we all thought 10 years ago. And some of that is a very, there's a nuanced reason for that gets into Clean Water Act regulations, where these technologies make a lot of sense for utilities is where they are forced to meet very stringent phosphorus limits in their effluent discharges. And so where you see a lot of these, the technology being deployed is they're looking for solutions to meet regulatory limits. And so for our members, that's often the driver, more so than say, hey, I'm just looking for a sustainable way to manage my phosphorus. Because of our public because we're public entities and we're using ratepayer dollar, some of these technologies that might be considered optional they're hard to justify from a financial return on investment type standpoint. So if in terms of covering any kind of upfront costs, that is a struggle. There's challenges with procurement, which gets into weeds of the municipal world. And I know the Austera folks probably could give you a whole long list of reasons why there's challenges, but we see long-term that there is great potential here within the water sector. It's just going to be slower going than I think we thought 10 years ago.